welcome back to Emotional Equilibrium. And these podcasts we are doing, and the series we are busy with now is Epigenetics. And you are joining this session with me, Natanya, as your host. Very welcome back. I'm so happy to join with you. Please note that I'm a quantum soul and quantum life consultant. I'm not a medically trained professional or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Should you display any symptoms that are worrying to you, your first priority is to contact a medically trained professional to assist you, please. Okay, let's quickly recap what we learned the previous session. We learned about epigenetic markers. Epi means on top of, genetic means our genes, and markers indicate a position where they will then turn on or turn off certain gene sequences or certain functions. Okay, so when we talk about epigenetics, right, we know what epigenetic markers are now, but epigenetics is the study of how these markers work. So how do our behaviors and our environment influence these epigenetic markers? Like, how does a marker decide to turn off and on? Now, some of it is in the genes themselves, right? If you get a bunch of genes from your parents with only blue eyes, all of the blue markers will be turned on. Okay, it's also important to understand that some of these markers are stronger. Some of the genes are stronger than the others. So if you think about, if you have two parents with brown eyes having a child, they'll probably have brown eyes because brown eyes are more dominant than blue and green eyes on the genes. But we see that there are certain things, our behaviors and our environment do influence our epigenetic markers. And that study of how behavior and environment influences the markers we call epigenetics. Okay, and so we see that epigenetics and these of environments and our influences and our behaviors can change markers on our genes, and they can sometimes change even how our genes work. Now, this is all science. Let's quickly look at it. Okay, so first of all, we remember that genes are a certain part of the DNA. If you have a ball of wool and you roll it out, the entire strand of wool is the DNA. The gene is only a section on the DNA that has a function. Eye color, hair color, whether it's a skin cell or whether it's a heart cell or a lung cell or a kidney cell, whatever cell it is. Okay, so I put a few examples up here as well. These genes cannot be changed. Okay, certain genes will stay the same, but how they are turned off and on, meaning expressed or transcribed, these are the words that science uses. How a gene expresses itself or how it is transcribed in the function of communication or by means of communication can be changed by the epigenetic markers. The genes will always be there, whether they will be activated or inactivated. So you cannot take the gene away. The gene is on the DNA. It will always be there, but we can influence with our behaviors and with our actions and with our environment how they are turned on and turned off by these epigenetic markers. Okay, so let's look at how this further works. So if the DNA in each cell is the same, so if you think, I said in the previous session, every cell has the same DNA in it because it has the same chromosomes, and the chromosomes are all rolled up the same and they all look the same. So if all of our DNA in every single cell looks the same, why do our cells look different? Why does a lung look different than a heart? Why does hair look different than eyes? Why does, how does my eyelashes know to stop growing at a certain length, whilst my hair on top of my head, both of them are hair, but the hair on top of my head never stops growing. It just keeps on growing. And this is all due to epigenetic markers. So if the DNA in each cell is the same, why does each cell look so differently? It's because if you think about lungs and a heart, in a heart cell, all of the genetic sequences, the gene sequences for a heart is turned on, while everything that is not a heart cell is turned off on the gene sequences. With the lungs, the same. Everything that makes it a lung cell is turned on, while everything that is not a lung cell is turned off. And so we see that genetics and epigenetic markers play a very important role in our communication in the forming months, especially in the womb, but also in determining what a cell's function will be. But another thing that they notice is that you have the nature part of the genes, nature meaning the information on the DNA that you get from your parents. That is nature. You cannot change that. That's the sequence that you get. You cannot change the sequence that you get. But the nurturing can change it. If you, studies have shown that there's no one born as a narcissist. Narcissists are made. Okay, and so we see the nature of a person is not to be a narcissist. But if you nurture, or if there's lack of nurture with a child, they can become a narcissist. And that will then become a genetic marker on the DNA, which we don't want. So if the nature of who you are is the genes from your father and your mother, the nurturing of who you are is influenced by your behavior and by your environment. Okay, so we see that we have these three parts that actually make up and influence the expression of our genes. The genes themselves, they must be there, okay? If you don't have genes for eye color, then you will not have eye color, okay? So the genes must be present, and we get them from our parents. But we also see that our environment that we live in and how we are treated and how we eat and what we eat and how much we eat will influence our genes, as well as the choices of the individual, your own choices. You cannot say, well, I was born this way. No, there are certain things that your behavior and your own choices will have an effect on, and that will then be carried onto your own genome sequence that you will one day pass on to your own children. Okay, so when we look at nature, no child is born with a genetic sequence that, for example, is programmed to smoke. This is an epigenetic weakness or behavior or repetition due to mind washing, society, you seeing your parents smoking. It is not in our nature to smoke. It's not part of our bodies. Our bodies clearly don't want it because we disagree with it. We become sick. We get all sorts of disease from smoking. But when someone smokes over time, we see many times that people become generational smokers. Your father smokes, your mother smokes, so you smoke. And we see it becomes a behavior that is mimicked, even though in nature, it's not something that's good for you or that your body necessarily wants. So if you're forming cells, right, when your, let's say, dad smoked during the time that you were conceived. So dad smoked and those cells had nicotine in them that made you. You are more likely to become a smoker because at the time of conception, you already had nicotine in your body. Whether you were 2 or 3 cells, they had nicotine in them. And even if your parents quit smoking when you are older, your chances are still higher for you to be a smoker because you already had the nicotine, the behavior, the environment was already embedded with nicotine. If you saw your parents smoke, or then you will also be more likely to be a smoker because you saw someone do something repetitively. And the research about all of this is there. If you just go online and search how this one behavior of smoking becomes an epigenetic marker that's passed down from generation to generation to generation. So I know of 2 people whose parents both smoke, but they themselves, they don't smoke. They were probably born with every single possibility and predisposition to smoking, but they chose themselves not to be slaves and to change their own epigenetic cycles before their children were born, meaning that the epigenetic marker or the predisposition for smoking will not be passed down to their own children because they stopped the behavior before their kids were born, and they never became a slave to that behavior. So next time we will be looking at a bit deeper into how our ancestors' behaviors and environments influences their descendants and their descendants' epigenetic markers, whether it's good or bad. And they are good markers. Like, for example, my friends I just mentioned, they changed that bad behavior, and the positive change they made was made on their DNA and passed down to the next generation. And that's amazing. Okay, so I'm looking very forward to seeing you for our next session. I hope you learned something with me today, and I hope you have a lovely day. I see you next time. Thank you so much for joining me today in this podcast. I hope it enriched your life. Until next time, blessings.